Num num. Num num. Birdie num num.
When I have understanding of computers, I shall be the supreme being. God isn't interested in technology. He knows nothing of the potential of the microchip or the silicon revolution. Look how he spends his time. 43 species of parrots. Nipples for men.
Don't do that, Jesus Christ! You're gonna get me killed!
Out of here!
Oh, Billy.
I have nipples, Greg. Could you milk me?
Welcome, everybody, to AB Live. Yes, it is a world where men have nipples, but it's a hunk of burning gnosis every time you arrive at the Virtual Alexandria. And always excited on this, especially on this Monday, Lunes, day of the moon, as we will be talking a lot about the moon. Welcome, everybody, to Aeon Byte. I am still Miguel Connor, your Pompatus of Gnosis, and that madman across the waters of creation. With us, as always, it's good to have the myth, the man, my friend, Jason Reza Jorjani. Jason, how are you? And thanks for coming on.
Not bad, Miguel. I'm glad to be here with you in any case.
In any case, yes, here we are in the desert. Yeah. It's like
How you
what...
doing, good to see you.
Hello, Vance. How are you?
Hey, good to see you too, Jason.
Yes, as Emil Cioran said, I get corrected if I say Cioran. He said, we are all at the bottom of hell where every second is a miracle. So we do the best we can here on the dark side of the moon, even though, as a matter of fact, it's all dark. And yes, I told myself that I would not, under any circumstances, quote Christopher Cross's theme of Arthur if you get caught. I'm not even going to say it because it's so corny, and I don't even want to talk about Arthur. Such a weird movie that sort of glorifies alcoholism. It was great when I was a kid, and obviously Liza Minnelli, Dudley Moore, and the great Sir John Gielgud were quite a cast. But so I'm going to stay away from Christopher Cross tonight. I'll try.
How about the movie Moon? That's one of my favorites. I don't know if you've seen that one. It's science fiction.
No. Moonraker, the James Bond
one? Moon. It's just called Moon.
Are you talking about the one where they have these, I don't want to give any plot spoilers for those who haven't seen it, but they're mining helium-3 on the moon?
Yeah.
Let's just say very few people stationed up there. That one?
Yeah,
I've seen that. Not a bad film. For a relatively low-budget production, it was good.
Interesting. Well, my favorite moon film is going to be Iron Skies. It's still one of my favorite ones. It's like Sharknado. You have to watch it once a year just to amuse yourself. So, but yeah, definitely a lot of moon-themed books. So for the audience, again, we want to do a little AMA. This is your chance to ask Jason questions about his body of work. His book, I enjoyed it, but reading the book, of course, somebody who's read all of your books, I was like, oh, I remember this from Iranian Leviathan. I remember this from Prometheism. There's a lot of these ideas coming. Of course, I was saying myself, damn it, I wish we could get a Mazdakite movement here in the United States because it just worked so well back then during the Persian Empire. If we could just get it to work again. But anyway, I'm getting sidetracked. For the audience, please super chat your questions. It can be as low as $1. It helps out because we already have more than 100 people in the chat. It's going to get more people are going to show up, so it's easier for Vance. It's hard when everybody's talking, so it's easy if you super chat so Vance can get to your question and pin it, and then we can ask Jason. So let's talk about your book, Jason, Artemis Unveiled. I would like to show the preview, if you don't mind me reading the summary.
Absolutely. Go ahead.
All right. And then I shall do share screen. And then we'll talk about the contents of the book. Window, Chrome. Yeah, I want the window. All right. I have it here. Paste. In the year 2112, yeah, again, that's that Rush reference that we talked about last time, Admiral Hyrcanius recounts the vicissitudes of a tumultuous history that culminated in the victory of Prometheism over traditionalism. It includes a Third World War, a Second American Civil War, a coronal mass ejection, a pole shift, and other catastrophe that result in mass depopulation, deindustrialization, and the rise of a traditionalist world order led by China, Russia, and Islam under the banner of the United States. The destruction of the Anglo-American establishment leads to several revelations regarding crimes committed by the cabal in charge of the deep state. Meanwhile, a Promethean society with post-Islamic Iran as its bastion breaks away from the traditionalist world order and wages a titanic rebellion against the Devas or Olympians, who disclose themselves in 2048 as the guardians and ancestors of humanity. We are presented with a detailed description of the science, technology, and society of this Promethean community, which eventually stretches from the Oort cloud and asteroid belt to the ocean depths of Earth and the reclaimed megalithic cities of Sidonia on Mars. There has been a spectral revolution and a profound transformation of consciousness that could be considered post-human. Part prediction, part revelation, and part aspiration. This is Jorjani's vision of a Promethean utopia being born from out of the flames of an apocalypse that unfolds throughout the 21st century. However, some will surely see it as a horrifically dystopian cautionary tale concerning things to come. Well, there you have it, Jason. What am I missing, or what else do you want to say about the book? Oh, you're on mute. Jason, you're on mute.
Sorry, I was going to say that it's a good thing you read that one. This version that wound up on the back of the book is probably a bit more truncated than the one that I had originally sent you.
Oh, okay.
But no, it's a good summary of the book, so we can take that as our point of departure.
Yeah, and this one is different than your other ones because in this one it's more of a first-person narration concerning the history, the meta history, all the different things. There's no there's no action scenes, there's no dialogue. It's not a third-person one like some of your other novels.
I'll tell you, frankly, what it is. I mean, even though it is sort of nominally framed as a novella, what it really is a utopian philosophical text. It's part prophecy or prediction of the future and part utopian philosophical vision, sort of in the style of Plato's Republic or, like H.G. Wells's The Shape of Things to Come. That's the type of text that it is. It uses predictions over the course of the next, let's say, quarter of a century from 2025 to 2050 to set the stage for the presentation of a philosophical vision of a utopian Promethean society. So my, more tangible, more crystallized vision of what I would actually consider an ideal but practicable Promethean society is set in the context of the catastrophes that unfold between now and, say, 2050 that take apart the modern world. And that's an important setup because otherwise, people would immediately react by saying, look, this is insane. We would never have a society like this. I mean, how do you envisage us getting from where we are today to a world that's been so radically restructured? And my argument in the book, or rather, the case that I make is, well, the modern world is going to be torn apart anyhow. And I show the various convergent factors that are going to essentially, wreck the form of society that we have and plunge us into a dynamic chaos that could much more conceivably be reshaped into this Promethean society that I envision.
Oh, indeed. It's not an easy read, any of your books, because it's both cosmic, it's Terran, it's history that's happening on different dimensions, it's history that's happening back and forth in time with these power players. It makes you feel so small and makes you feel bad because, as you say, Jay, as we know, a lot of people die with these machinations of these terrible beings, and the solution for revolution just means more deaths, unfortunately, more destructions of civilization and all that. It's a hard read, but it's important. It's important to know the truth and the veils to be open and have all our cards on the table. So, but in your world, so the audience can know the bad guys, the archons, who's the good guys and who's the bad guys. The good guys are those who have embraced the Promethean spirit, that of the trickster, that of the inner fire of the human being. I'm assuming those also deal with the trickster, these alien interdimensional tricksters, for these John Keel beings. Who are the bad guys?
So this will be familiar to anyone who's read Closer Encounters, where I empirically make the case for the world situation that I describe in a much more concise manner in Artemis Unveiled. Mm-hmm. And so if you want to look at empirical evidence for what I'm about to describe, look at Closer Encounters, which really goes into this in depth and detail. Essentially, what I show in this novella, in Artemis Unveiled, is how a group of self-styled gods who have time-traveling capability and who have attempted to socially engineer human societies really from the dawn of time, they are conspiring to create a series of convergent catastrophes that are going to deindustrialize the planet and basically put us in an incredibly weakened, desperate, and submissive position before they then return and assert themselves as the guardians and ancestors of humanity, and before they're welcomed by the majority of Earth's population as the saviors that were promised in their respective religious scriptures. So I basically argue that these Olympians, as I tend to call them, the Olympian gods, who can also be seen as the ancestors of Confucianism or the Devas of Hinduism, that these archons, to put it in Gnostic language, they are basically inculcating us with a kind of Stockholm syndrome, where we are their hostages, we are their captives, and yet we're being set up through the engineering of these convergent catastrophes to welcome them as our saviors. Okay, so we run from our abuser into the arms of our abuser. And that's the situation that I'm describing. And these people are mainly based inside what turns out to be a hollow moon, an artificial space station, although they have bases underwater and in other places inside mountains and so forth. But round about the year 2048, after a series of convergent catastrophes, everything from the Third World War, a simultaneous Second American Civil War, to long-term effects, let's say, of the COVID pandemic, to a variety of catastrophes that appear natural, such as earthquakes and tsunamis and so forth, but that might actually be caused by a new generation of weapons that we know exist, like HARP or certain tectonic weaponry. And there's also a depiction in there of a coronal mass ejection, a solar storm on the scale, at least, of the Carrington event, which, how unfortunately, winds up hitting the Western hemisphere of the world and essentially acts to deal a death blow to Western civilization in particular. And so on the tail end of all these convergent catastrophes, you have the reemergence into the public, into the open, of these occulted ancestors, guardians, or gods. And they essentially impose a traditionalist society on the world based on the so-called perennial philosophy and the convergence of all of the quote-unquote great world religions. And they do this, and we can get into this in detail, if you want to, but they do this under the banner of the United Nations. And believe it or not, a United Nations now led by China, which, you know, a lot of people would wince at that and say, look, I mean, the Chinese and the Russians, why would they want to even salvage the United Nations as an institution? It's been a Western dominated institution. They're creating this supposed multipolar world, et cetera, et cetera. But I lay out what I think is a compelling vision of how the Third World War ends. And it very significantly involves France flipping over to the side of China and Russia. And France consequently also leveraging basically their influence on how the new world order takes shape. And it's at the insistence of France that the whole thing remain under the umbrella of the United Nations, and that China and Russia exercise their hegemony through that framework that still includes the French.
Yeah, very interesting. So why don't we talk a little bit about, well, first wanted to ask you also too, and so the audience knows, especially if they're reading your book, the Olympians, they're again these archons, the world players, the controllers. Oh, did I lose my? No, I didn't lose my camera. I saw a cat running by. These are the Olympians, but on the other side you have the Asuras and the Titans, right? These are the ones we should be sort of tapping into, imploring. These are the ones that really get us to who we are.
Well, you know, I've always had an ambiguous relationship to those entities, or whatever you want to call them, those people, those folks, because you see, they tried. They've already attempted their vision of rebellion against the Olympians, and it failed pretty catastrophically. I lay out the case for this in Closer Encounters. And it's also included in the narrative of Artemis Unveiled, that essentially these Asuras, these Titans who are at battle with the Devas, or the Olympian gods, they are the people who basically, well, I don't want to say they were responsible for, but it's in the context of their struggle with the Olympians that we wound up having the Martian biosphere destroyed in a nuclear holocaust.
Right.
And so I think that the battle described in myths as the Titanomachia, which you also see in some of the Hindu epics, that the primordial battle of the gods and the Titans, that this took place on Mars, and it already destroyed the biosphere of an Earth-like planet. So,
look, Carl Schwab is in the chat if he's looking at it. So
is he really?
Important visit. No, just kidding. Just showing the. Sorry, go ahead. But but Atlantis, that was humans versus the Olympians. The Titans were nowhere to be seen at that particular stage.
Here's how I understand it. What Plato tells us, and I've described this all the way back to Prometheus and Atlas, my first book, and then I came back to it in Closer Encounters. What Plato tells us in Timaeus and Critias, and also in another dialogue that's related that people often overlook, the dialogue Cratylus, is that certain of the divine beings broke with the program and mated with humans, and the Atlantean leadership were demigods. They were hybrids of gods and humans, which is actually what the word hero means in Greek. The word hero, its root is eros, and it's referring to the basically intercourse between gods and humans and the creation of a race of hybrids. These are exactly the same beings that we find in Genesis and in the book of Enoch as, the Nephilim, as the basically products of mating between the fallen angels, quote unquote, the rebel angels, and humans. And so I would see those as the Asuras. So Atlantis was an Ashura-spawned civilization, and in particular, one defined by the spirit of Prometheus and Atlas. Prometheus, the knowledge bringer, to put it in Judeo-Christian terms, Lucifer, and then Atlas, the king of Atlantis. And so you have, this Ashuric impulse behind the rise of Atlantis, but it's not an entirely Ashuric or Titanic civilization. it's a civilization that ultimately, as well, both Plato and Rudolf Steiner describe, became increasingly human, increasingly mortal in its genetic composition over time. And so we're dealing there with kind of an Ashura-inspired human rebellion against the Devas, whereas the Titanomachia is a much more primordial story. It takes place much further back in the prehistoric past, and it's a battle between the Titans themselves and the gods. And interestingly enough, by the way, and this is partly my ambiguity in terms of the Ashuras, in that battle, Prometheus sided with the gods. And so Prometheus is very unusual as a Titan, because he tries to make these fellow Titans see reason and to strategize properly in their battle against the gods, and they won't listen to him. They just want to use brute force. So he can see, being the one who sees ahead, his name means forethought, he can see that this is not going to end well. So he sides with Zeus, and he winds up getting a preferred place basically at the right hand of Zeus. This is essentially the same archetypal structure as the story of Lucifer as the right hand of God. Mm-hmm. And then later, of course, Prometheus turns on Zeus once he sees that he's a tyrannical bastard who wants to lord over this poor race of beings.
Meet the new boss. Yeah, meet the new boss, same as the old boss.
That's right. So why is that important? Let me philosophically underline why is that important. It's important because I'm not trying to advocate in Artemis Unveiled. People who read it will see this, that we go worship some race of Titans as opposed to some race of gods, or we become like underlings in a battle between Titans and gods, or we become the proxies of the Titans in their beef against the gods. No. I'm saying that we should have a very guarded, cautious, self-interested relationship potentially with these beings who have a common enemy and certain capabilities.
Yeah, for sure. Well, let's talk about the moon, since it's so important, and that's how your book, at the beginning of your book, you basically slam the conventional narrative of the moon. Some examples, I think you said, who was it? Some astronaut said that they could hear a hollow sound while they were up there, and you give some evidence that the moon is, not all it's cut out to be.
Yeah, it's not a hollow sound. What happened is that in Apollo 12 and in Apollo 13, there were basically objects that were impacted against the moon, and there was a pre-positioned seismometer which returned signatures that indicated that the moon was largely hollow.
Right.
So in the first case, what was the date here? 19 November of 1969. So in November of 1969, Apollo 12's lander crashed into the surface of the moon, and a pre-positioned seismometer registered reverberations for about an hour. And then once this, to say the least, raised eyebrows at NASA, they deliberately repeated this as a formal test in Apollo 13, where they crashed the third stage of the Saturn V launch vehicle into the moon. And this object, which weighed 15 tons, it caused the moon to basically ring for 3 hours, to ring like a hollow bell for 3 hours. This was April 14th, 1970. Mm-hmm. Okay, and a number of scientists have commented on this, including, by the way, of all people, Carl Sagan, before he became such a staunch skeptic. Sagan's early work was interesting. He wrote an early book on extraterrestrial intelligence with a Russian scientist, and he was a little more forthcoming in his early days. And he commented on this and said, well, this is frightening because a natural moon cannot be hollow that way. And so this is one of the telltale signs that we're dealing with an artificial space station. But there are a number of others that are frankly equally disturbing. And one is that on the moon, no matter how wide the craters are, they're always only a certain depth, right? So you would expect, like on Earth, if asteroid impacts or meteorites, whatever, are going to cause a crater to form, that the crater would be proportionally as deep as it is wide. And moreover, you'd expect the crater basin to be concave. But on the moon, you have only convex crater basins, which are all the more apparently convex the wider the basin is, right? And these basins are all shallow. So just so I make sure I don't get this number wrong, I think it was something like yeah, okay, let me give you some of these numbers because the devil's in the details here, and the numbers are really actually quite astonishing. So you have none of these craters are more than 5 or 6 miles deep. So for example, the Gagarin crater, the crater named after Yuri Gagarin, is 186 miles across, but less than 4 miles deep. Clavius is 146 miles in diameter, so it could fit the entire land area of Switzerland and Luxembourg in it, but the crater only goes 3 miles down at its greatest depth. So this is problematic, okay? And then the fact that these crater basins all look like a contact lens.
Right.
So what does that tell you? It means that whenever something is impacting with the moon, an asteroid or whatever, the ejecta is exposing a hard interior shell, which has been covered by the regolith as if the regolith, the moon dust and rock, is astroturf. There's one more very significant piece of evidence here, and that's these mass cons. There are places, mass concentration, presumed mass concentration. There are places on the moon where the gravity changes suddenly.
Wow. Okay.
And it's a problem for navigation, apparently. So when they're flying close to the moon, they have to account for these mass cons because otherwise they would lose a spacecraft. It might suddenly plummet to the surface of the moon. And what they think is, they have these bizarre theories. First of all, there's no real evidence that there are volcanoes on the moon, but they've come up with some bizarre theory that like there's volcanic activity on the moon, and because of the metallic elemental composition of the magma that's dried, like somehow this metallic composition is causing a shift in gravity and some bullshit. Okay. And so they call it a mass concentration, like lumpy cookie dough or something like in the moon. And it's caused by volcanic activity for which there's no evidence other than something else, which can also be explained by the moon being a UFO base, namely citing about 500 sightings of lights dancing on the surface of the moon, going back 300 years since the earliest astronomical observations of the moon. So going back to the 1700s, astronomers looking at the moon have always seen lights moving around on the surface of the moon. And these, dismissive so-called skeptics want to say that's evidence for volcanic activity on the moon, except that these lights fly in formation. And sometimes they fly specifically from one crater to another, and then they take off into space. So that's an interesting volcano.
Yeah, very interesting. Very normal volcano.
So anyway, to go back to the mass cons, what I suggest this really is that there are either facilities under the surface of the moon that are emulating Earth-like gravity, and they're causing the gravitational distortion, or there are the reason I venture this other hypothesis is that these mass cons all turn out to be circular. They're all circular. So another possibility is if it's a space station, there may be giant saucers embedded into the surface of the station as an evacuation protocol, so that if they ever need to leave this thing precipitously, they can just basically, these saucers will peel off. Huge saucers, they've got 0-point energy drives running in them. And so they're causing a gravitational distortion when anything passes over them. That's another hypothesis.
Now, how does that dovetail into the fact that the moon is always facing the Earth, which they quote unquote explain away by saying, well, the mass is lopsided, so therefore, it's gravitational attraction. You think those saucers are deliberately controlling the moon?
The moon is always facing the Earth. What is it's the same face always faces.
Yeah.
Always, yes.
Always. Oh wow.
Yeah, well, so
Gravitationally locked, they say.
First of all, yeah, a lot of scientists have commented on how unusual that is, and I don't think it's the saucers doing that. I think that there's machinery inside the moon doing it, because this thing is, look, it has an incredibly stable orbit. And moreover, it acts as a stabilizer for the Earth. The Earth, we would have 8-hour days without the moon. The Earth would be spinning so fast that we would have 8-hour days without the moon. The misalignment of the celestial horizon from the ecliptic, right? This 23-degree misalignment of the equator of the Earth, if you extend it out into space, and then our orbital plane with the sun, that's caused by the gravitational effect of the moon on the Earth. And so the reason we have seasons is because of the moon. If we didn't have the moon, one side of our planet, would always be like, unseasonably hot. And like the condition, let's just say the conditions for the evolution of humanoid life would be much more adverse between the fact that we wouldn't have seasons and you'd have temperature extremes geographically on the planet, and the fact that the planet would be spinning a lot faster. And so it seems like this is a terraforming device. And I would suggest that the fact that it always has one face presented toward the Earth is a function that's being generated by the same machinery that is responsible for this station acting as a terraforming device. The other benefit to having one side always face away from the Earth is that they can build a goddamn city there, which is what they've done. So Carl Wolf was a repairman who had a top secret clearance with the National Security Agency. He was an Air Force officer, but the NSA cleared him to come into an NSA facility in 1965. This is all in the Disclosure Project testimony that was amassed by Dr. Greer back in the days before he started to develop certain other ideas. Anyway, back in the days when he was a pure researcher, let's say, among the testimony amassed by Greer was this excellent account given by then Sergeant Carl Wolf, working for the Air Force, who was cleared to go into an NSA facility in 1965, a few years before Apollo. And he was there to repair a photograph processing machine, an image processing machine that was printing out mosaics of the dark side of the moon. Okay, mosaic photographs of the dark side of the moon. And what was coming off this machine in this classified facility, which, by the way, he said was full of scientists from all over the world. There were people of all kinds of nationalities there, and he couldn't figure out why the hell this would be the case. In 1965, in America, in an NSA facility, Japanese people, Indian people, all kinds of people. And what is this mosaic showing? A city on the dark side of the moon that looks like megalithic architecture. He said it wasn't made of metal. It was made of some kind of artificial stone that you could make giant buildings from out of. And he saw obelisks, he saw domed buildings, lots of polygonal buildings. And so, this guy expected he was going to hear this on the evening news for years, and it never happened. And we also have then the testimony of Ingo Swann, who I think Ingo Swann was tasked in 1975 by, the thing is, he actually doesn't know who he was tasked by. He was working for SRI, who was contracted by the CIA, Stanford Research Institute, had a CIA contract to develop remote viewing, and he was working for them. But some other guy called Axelrod came and grabbed Swann from out of that unit and said that his mission took precedence and he had a higher clearance. And he blindfolded him, put him on a helicopter, took him to some underground facility somewhere and had him remote view the dark side of the moon. And I think that it's the photographs of the type that Carl Wolf saw that now we're talking a decade later, right? They want a remote viewer to go look at what these photographs were showing.
Wow.
And Swan doesn't know this, he's blind to the target, the way that a remote viewer always is. So he starts describing this shit, and he's describing standing at ground level in a city on the dark side of the moon, and there's roads going in every which direction, and he sees saucers parked on the sides of craters. And the most disturbing thing that Swan reported was that these Nordic people who live there use slave labor. They have large groups of, believe it or not, naked slaves mining the craters. Now, how that's possible, it suggests that there's an atmosphere. There's some kind of dome or something over it. And these poor people live in like ramshackle housing that's like created by putting a mesh over a crater. And they're all sort of herded in there like cattle. And they're using the slave labor on the moon. So these are the people who in my novella, Artemis Unveiled, I depict as the Olympians, these sadistic, tyrannical overlords who, despite the fact that slave labor is utterly unnecessary considering their level of technology. I mean, they could build like robots to go craters for them, right? They, for some reason, they like to, maybe it's penal servitude. I don't know. In any case,
but the slaves are hybrids, right? They're not humans.
Well, these particular now in my novel,
in your novel, it's a hybrid factory or whatever you want.
In my novel, I talk about a number of things. First of all, I talk about how the gray robots, these biomechanical grays, which have been seen with the Nordics by a number of abductees, how they're manufactured on the moon. And so inside the moon, there's like a gray production line. All right. The grays are being rolled off the assembly line in there. Little munchkins who work for these Nordics.
Oompa Loompas.
Yeah. Poor Oompa Loompas. And then you have also all kinds of bizarre hybridization experiments going on inside the moon, that there are genetic laboratories and so forth that I, describe in there. But what Swan saw were human slaves working in craters on the surface of the moon, like chain gangs in the old days, like the naked slave laborers in Rome.
Right. That is really grim, especially, both the hybrids, and for those of you who might have watched the latest Guardians of the Galaxy, there's these themes about evolution and moon and all that other stuff. I guess the question is, Jason, why did we pretend to go to the moon in 1969, or did we go? Well, we can leave that off the table if you want that debate, and that's a twofold. And why are we trying to go to the moon with rocket called Artemis, ironically talking? I mean, the elite know this. It's not like, why are they playing this dog and pony show?
So here's what I think about that. And I briefly do touch on this in Artemis Unveiled when I talk about President Kennedy. Because, let me just make a side detour, and I'll come back to why did we go to the moon in Apollo, okay? But side detour, part of what I show in this novella is how, because of these convergent catastrophes, the security apparatus of the Anglo-American world is shattered, right? What we call the deep state. And it's a Five Eyes deep state. It's not an American deep state. It's it's the Anglosphere, basically, right? America, Britain, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, they're all part of the same thing. And so I show how this Anglospheric deep state is shattered by these convergent catastrophes, including their loss in the Third World War, a Second American Civil War, and so forth.
Right.
And so what winds up happening is it's not that there's an official disclosure, but it's that these people who had security oaths to the CIA, the NSA, are suddenly de facto released from their security oaths because those agencies don't exist anymore. The federal government that ran those agencies has collapsed. And the United States doesn't control like Australia, New Zealand, and so forth the way that it used to, or have the kind of influence it had in Canada. China has instead. So all these people who worked in these institutions, generals, admirals, high-level intelligence officers, they're released from their security oaths in, like, let's say, the Republic of Cascadia, where they now live, or, the Neo-Confederacy, or the California Republic, that's a sovereign nation. And they come out and basically testify to things that they had kept secret for years, which include, what really happened with the Kennedy assassination, 9/11, and some other things. And these disclosures in and of themselves are catastrophic. So this is a second wave of catastrophe. The physical catastrophes, war, earth changes and so forth, bring about a social catastrophe, which comes from these disclosures and further causes the unraveling of the social fabric worldwide, especially in the West, though. And so one of the things that I touch on, to go back to why did we go to the moon and Apollo, is that I think the main reason, JFK, I don't want to say he made a lot of enemies because he was standing up against the right people. But the main reason why, despite the fact that he didn't have a lot of friends, the main reason why he was assassinated, in my view, is because he had a plan to go to the moon with the Soviet Union, because he had been briefed that these bastards are up there, and he was going to openly and publicly unite with the Soviet Union in a common struggle against these entities, potentially using our nuclear weapons, the way that we had allied with the Soviet Union against Nazi Germany. And this is why he was killed, because the military was planning a private, mostly secret military lunar expedition, which would lead to the establishment of a American military base on the moon, where we would then point our nuclear missiles down at the Soviet Union. It was
Project Horizon.
Yeah, Project Horizon.
Yeah.
And Kennedy put his foot down and said, absolutely not. No way. Not only are we not going to build a military base on the moon, aiming our missiles at the Soviets, we're going to go to the moon with the Soviet Union. And we're going to plant both the flags on the moon simultaneously. This is why I think they killed him, and why they killed his brother, who would have continued that same mission. And so why did we go to the moon as publicly as we did? Well, because, the plan had been that we were going to ally with the communists in the common defense of humanity and the earth.
Yeah, very Star Trek Generations kind of the movie, or first thing, was it First Encounter or First Contact? Yeah, but and then since then we have not even tried to go to the moon, and now suddenly we want to go to the moon, even though magically the rockets keep breaking down. Artemis keeps breaking down.
Yeah, I don't think we want to go to the moon. I think what the deal is this, and this is what I portray in my novella, in Artemis Unveiled, is that, well, we haven't gone back to the moon because, first of all, the only reason we completed Apollo was because Kennedy committed us to it publicly. Okay, once he made those speeches, there was no turning back. So we had to go up there, we had to collect some rocks, and there had to be a photo op and so on and so forth, okay? But if you listen to these astronauts, look at their faces, the faces of the Apollo astronauts when they came back in their press conferences, they look like somebody beat the shit out of them. They do not look like well people. And their family members, their ex-wives, a lot of them went through divorces and so forth, have testified that they were wrecks. They became alcoholics. They were depressed. And most interestingly, they had no memory of what they actually did on the moon.
Really?
These people, when they're interviewed, what they recount to you sounds like a mission log, as if what they've been made to remember are the tasks that were specified for them. First we did this, and then we went over there and we did that. But if you confront them and say, no, but what did it feel like when you were standing in such and such place and you looked over such and such, they don't look well when you ask them questions like that. Almost as if someone's gone in and found some way, either through drugs or whatever, hypnosis or some combination thereof, to erase their memories of what they actually experienced on the moon. And then there's testimony from Russian intelligence that on the medical channel, which the astronauts used for basically, private matters, communication with ground control on medical issues and so forth, on this medical channel, which some, ham radio operators also picked up on, and the Russians definitely were monitoring, Armstrong and others basically said to ground control, what are we going to do with these ships? They're huge. They're huge. They're here and they're watching us.
Oh, my God.
And so they said they were warning us off. their behavior was threatening or menacing in some way. So anyway, it's clear why we didn't go back to the moon. and by the way, why we had Apollo 17, 18, 19, these were all ready to go. The spacecraft were built, and all of a sudden, what? There's no budget for it. I mean, that's ridiculous. Billions of dollars were already spent. The spacecraft were already built. Anyway, so okay, and then we haven't been back in all these decades.
Okay, so you believe we went to the moon, and you don't?
Oh yeah.
You don't subscribe to Kubrick and the fake moon landing theory.
Well, I'll tell you, there's one thing about that I do find compelling, which is that if you know you're going to run into some really weird shit up there that you can't disclose to the public, it's advisable to have alternate footage prepared.
Yeah.
So that you might create some hybrid of actual audio and stage footage so that you're not showing the saucers that are terrifying Armstrong and company to the American television watchers, you know?
Yeah.
That makes some sense to me. But no, I think we went to the moon physically. And I don't think the United States wants to go back. I think that the United States has to go back because China and Russia have definite plans of, I was going to say colonizing the moon, but let's just say establishing a presence on the moon. Okay. And see, this is what's really disturbing to me, because it's obvious that the Russians have a full intelligence dossier on what happened to us on the moon and what we found out.
Right.
And if the Russians are building a space station around the moon together with the Chinese, which they are, their plan is they're going to build a space station that orbits the moon, and they're going to send their astronauts from the space station down to the surface and back up again. That's the way they plan to do it. And if that's the level of space cooperation between the Chinese and the Russians on the moon, clearly the Russians have handed that dossier over to the Chinese. Moreover, the Chinese, given their culture, given their values, are not going to be humiliated on the moon the way that we were, okay? They are not going to go all the way up there just to, be scared and turn tail and come back to the Earth, right? And waste billions of dollars of research and development money. So what does this mean? This means the Chinese have gotten clearance to go to the moon, which means the Chinese are in cahoots with the people in the moon.
Yeah.
And so a lot can be extrapolated from this in terms of the shifting balance of power in the world and how basically the world order is going to be restructured toward collectivism, paternalism, traditionalism, and everything else that you can see as facets of the Confucian way of life that sit very well with the most orthodox aspects of other quote-unquote great world religions like Hinduism or the Abrahamic faiths.
No, makes sense. Vince, I have to let the cat out. Probably a Russian spy. But any super chats for Jason?
Yeah, we got one from Esoteric Teachings, who says, Madame Blavatsky, channeling the Tibetan, was told the moon was the original habitat of humanity. What are your thoughts? And he says, love your channel.
I think there's something to that in not the original habitat of humanity, but look, I mean, Blavatsky, she was a raw psychic. I mean, she just, she was a medium in the classic sense. And I think she was a live wire who hit on a lot of things relatively accurately, but, what she extrapolated from that, what her analytical overlay, as the remote viewers put it, on top of that raw data was, I think, might not have been as high fidelity. But I think Blavatsky was onto something in so far as my hypothesis, which I lay out in detail in Closer Encounters, is that the moon was used to transport these superhuman people, whatever you want to call them, gods, titans, whatever, from Mars to Earth. So what I argue in Closer Encounters is that after Mars's biosphere was destroyed, scouts were sent from Mars to Earth, and it was determined that Earth was too volatile to be a place for the habitation of humanoid life. And the dinosaurs were still alive at that point.
Oh.
And by the way, this is not, I'm going to pull this out of my own head or whatever. This is based on Joe McMoneagle remote viewing for the CIA in 1984 at the Monroe Institute. And he was among a number of people who remote viewed the destruction of humanoid civilization on Mars. And what he said was that those people scouted the Earth, but it was an Earth where there were constantly violent storms, volcanic eruptions, a climate that did not suit human beings. And there was the problem of these gigantic beasts, namely the dinosaurs, okay, that we wouldn't be able to get along with very well. And so they caused the asteroid impact that was a death knell for the dinosaurs, and which together with this artificial satellite terraformed the Earth into a place suitable for human habitation. And so what I think Blavatsky may be getting right is that the space station, what I call Artemis Station in the book, this moon was populated by refugees from Mars who came to the Earth. And so if Blavatsky describes it as, the original home of humanity, well, yeah, I mean, the human race that subsequently populated the surface of the Earth came from out of the moon, and they were living inside the moon on their way from Mars to the Earth. That's probably what I think she was, hitting on.
Okay.
Makes sense. Yeah, I see another one. Yeah, I love this auto thing that it auto pins, Vance. It's easier.
Yeah, I know. Did you set that up?
No,
yeah.
it must be StreamYard.
No, Auto Star Super Chats. It's a switch. Cool.
Yeah.
You want to do another one, Miguel?
Let's do another one. Yeah. And for everybody, if you have, please super chat them. I see a lot of questions, but again, everything's moving so fast. Our screen only catches the super chats now.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Ben. Sorry.
For example, Powdered Toast Man. I like powdered French toast. Hoffmeister says, reincarnation is a, quote, natural gift, unquote. Does this mean you believe in higher power? Who do you think granted us this, quote unquote, gift?
I don't think anyone granted us this gift, if you want to call it a gift. I think that it is a way to optimize personality development and basically the rendering of conscious entities by storing experiences from prior embodiment in the world. I'm trying to carefully use words so I don't use words like physical, okay? Right. In other words, think about it this way. If you were designing a game, one of these, massive multiplayer online games, right? And you have a bunch of NPCs in that game, non-player characters who are sort of like part of the background of the game. But you also have avatars for the game players. And in this game, it's possible to be killed. But, like in all these games, going back to the original Nintendo, you have multiple lives, right? Now, wouldn't it make a lot more sense in terms of the continuity of personality of the avatar to store the memories from previous lives and have them be accessible, right? I mean, why would you'd be wasting memory and wasting processing power to have rendered all these memories and then just have them be discarded each time the avatar dies. No, you want to store that somewhere, like in the cloud or whatever, right? And so I think that, and I've argued this in my previous books, in the ontological, sections of certain of my previous books, that our cosmos is a quantum computational system. It works like one of these massive multiplayer online games. And so it has certain optimization features, which include storage of past life memories. Now, the bigger question to me, the more perplexing problem is, why do we have such low fidelity recall of past lives? To me, the problem is not, that we have memories of past lives, that people have these accounts, which have been studied, by the way, with great scientific rigor by individuals like Dr. Ian Stevenson, University of Virginia, 30 years, doctor of psychiatry, studied thousands of cases of young children who had spontaneous memories of past lives. To me, these are not the disturbing accounts. To me, what's disturbing is that the vast majority of people can't remember their past lives. Why is that? And I venture a hypothesis empirically in Closer Encounters, and then as part of the narrative in Artemis Unveiled, that there is, to use the Soviet word for it, psychotronic machinery inside the moon, which has the capacity to cut into the bardo state, to cut into the transition between death and rebirth, what in the Tibetan tradition they call the bardo state, and to basically set up a soul trap for people. Okay, I make the case looking at the intersection of abduction reports and near-death experiences from the databases of Raymond Fowler and Kenneth Ring. Kenneth Ring wrote the Omega Project, and then Raymond Fowler did the whole series of books on the Andreasen affair, the case of Betty Andreasen Luca, the housewife who was abducted in the late 60s. And the databases of Dr. Fowler and Kenneth Ring essentially demonstrate that there's some very intimate connection between alien abductions and near-death experiences, and that the same kinds of entities are in many cases behind them. So, for example, while someone's being abducted by some Greys, they will encounter a dead person, a dead relative, who they didn't know was dead. And then a couple days after their abduction experience, they'll get a phone call from, their aunt saying that Uncle Joe died. And the Greys showed this guy Uncle Joe. Uncle Joe was with the Greys during the abduction experience. This has happened over and over again. There's other cases where people have NDEs, and the beings that take them into a hellish realm or into a heavenly realm look like the Greys or the tall Nordics. In the case of Betty Andreasen, she was taken by a bunch of Greys, and then these munchkins reported to the tall Nordics, who were the height of basketball players. They were these beautiful blonde-haired angels. Actually, they said that they were the angels. They came right out and said that that's who they were. And they said the Greys work for them. They're basically like robots. And what they are the watchers. And they write down everyone's deeds during their life. I mean, this could be a quote out of the freaking Quran. This is what the Quran says. For each soul, there is a watcher writing down your deed. And so the Nordics explained to Betty Andreasen, we use them to transport souls, and they record the deeds of souls. And here, look into this doorway. That light back there is the light of God. And that light sent Jesus into the world, and he's coming back soon. Don't worry, he's coming back soon. And so, okay, this is an abduction experience. Abduction to where? Heaven? Anyway, so I've argued in Closer Encounters, and I've recapitulated in this book, that this business about the tunnel of light, and this is going to rub a lot of people the wrong way, but look, this business about the tunnel of light, where people go into the light down this tunnel, and then they see dead relatives, or they see Jesus, or if they're Hindus, they see the Hindu gods. There's this one terrifying case of a Hindu who had an NDE and went to the Hindu hell, one of the hell realms, right? And this guy, Jatav, whatever, Singh or something, it wasn't Singh, because he was a Hindu, not a Sikh. In any case, this Jatav character, he was being punished in hell by having his legs amputated. And then it was realized that there had been an administrative blunder, like out of a Kafka novel.
Oh, no.
They got the wrong guy. And they weren't supposed to cut this guy's legs off. It was supposed to be some other guy. Matter of fact, they weren't supposed to bring this guy to hell at all. So then they have to they have to put Jatov's legs back on, and he has to go through a rack of amputated legs and pick out which ones are his so they can attach his legs. Like, here's the creepy thing, right? Meanwhile, this guy is dead in a hospital. This Jatov is actually, while he's having this NDE,
Right.
he's dead in a hospital. When he suddenly comes back to life after a very long time of being flatlined, he has scars on his knees at exactly where his legs were supposedly amputated by the Hindu gods in hell. Okay, so what the hell's going on here? I mean, this suggests to me that there is a technology behind this. There is a spectral technology or a psychotronic means of manipulating the transition between death and rebirth in a way that captures souls. And I think probably, let's just say, puts them in less than optimal conditions for rebirth. And part of that is what Plato depicted in Republic as drinking from the river of Lethe. Plato in Republic talks about how, in the transition between death and rebirth, you're forced to drink from this river of forgetfulness, this water from this river that makes you forget your past life. And so I think they do something to us to degrade the fidelity of our past life memories. And that probably if we could find a way to throw a monkey wrench in this machinery, as I depict in Artemis Unveiled, we would probably have higher fidelity past life memories. It would probably still require, some kind of work, whether it's hypnotic regression or whatever other things. But I think we would generally have many more cases of spontaneous recall of past lives of the type that Ian Stevenson studied, with all these little children.
How about not going into the light? If you're having an NDE or whatever, or if you quote unquote think you're dying, and there's a light, and there's come into the light. How about running away from the light?
I'm really sticking my neck out by saying this, but I really recommend not going in there. I really I would recommend that you have a very good idea of what you want to do next. Once you leave your present form of embodiment. And that you attempt to basically remain true to your own will as consciously as possible and not be distracted or diverted from your own intent for your spiritual future, for the future of your soul and for the further unfolding of your life's purpose, meaning your purpose across many incarnations.
No, makes sense. And for the audience, we have this week Maja Daouz going to talk about her ideas on archons and mind parasites, and she talks about the entire other world of the dead is a trap. You have to stay away from the underworld. It's not Joseph Campbell Jung happy. It's all bad, and we have to find a way out. And then we'll have Paul Levy talking about Wetiko. So it's going to be a week of intensity, and that story was amazing, Jason. It just reminds me, Gurdjieff was right. We are food for the moon, and the whole universe really is like a Rick and Morty show, a Simpsons Treehouse of Horrors, or Futurama. It's a disaster.
Let me add one thing to that, Miguel, to make to cause our audience to lose even more sleep,
and definitely their dinner.
Well, that for sure. Look, these cases where let's say there's a huge gap between someone's father dying and themselves passing away, right? Mm-hmm. And or having an NDE, right? Like let's say somebody's parents passed away 30 years ago. And then this person is now 70 years old himself and has a heart attack and almost dies. Well, they do flatline. They flatline for some time and they have an NDE. And the 70-year-old, whose parents have been dead for 30 years, comes back and says, oh, after I went into the light, mom and dad were there and they said the whole family was waiting for me. Look, we know from Stevenson's case studies that there's usually a very short gap between death and rebirth. There are some exceptions, but generally it's like between 2 and 8 years or something. It's always less than a decade, almost always less than a decade, and usually only a few years. Sometimes it's a few months. So this idea that the dead relatives are waiting for decades and decades to welcome you into the world beyond the light and all this, it's bullshit, okay? That's mind manipulation. And look, you can give drugs to someone to cause them to go into a euphoric state. There's ways of having bliss reinforcement that gets someone to buy into imagery that they're being shown for a manipulative purpose. And so I suggest that, you know, this is part of what the psychotronic imagery does, that it basically reaches into someone's memories and it produces images that are going to cause that person to surrender themselves to the situation that's being created for them.
Food for the moon.
Food for the moon, man.
Is there anybody on our side? I mean, we got all these things after us.
The
We got
tricksters,
the Titans, the Olympians.
The
I mean, they're all
tricksters, man.
tricksters.
No.
Where's the eons when you need them? You know.
Yeah, the trickster is on our side, and I again pick up on elements that I had empirically made the case for in Closer Encounters here in this novella, where basically I suggest that some of the weirdest elements of Close Encounters, the kind of elements that, let's say, John Keel liked to focus on, you know, these really fortunate phenomena that are associated with Close Encounters, they are manifestations of a superhuman intelligence that can be adequately described by the trickster archetype, and that this force is, I don't want to say on the side of humanity, but on the side of people with a Promethean spirit, let's put it that way. On the side of innovative, creative people who want, you know, exploration and discovery to continue on into the future, and who are intent on resisting the reimposition of tradition and feudalism and paternalism in the world.
Yeah, love change, love freedom. Yeah, the age of Hermes, as I'm saying. So yeah, hug your Mothman tonight, people, if you want to be free. Hug your Mothman. If they're outside cold, bring them in your house. So and Vance, keep going with the super chats. There's some good questions.
Okay, we got
everybody.
some,
And
yeah.
thank you everybody who's contributing.
Let's see. Powdered Toast Man did another one
name.
here. Are there practices to remember past future lives? You mentioned regression, but are there other ones?
It's a little laconically phrased here. I'm not exactly sure what he means. Are there practices? Oh, are there practices in order that could cause memories?
So you to
By what practices can one remember one's previous lives?
Yes.
Look, it's been fairly well demonstrated by, what was that guy's name? Helen Wambach is one female psychologist who does past life regression hypnosis in order to excavate past life memories. Helen Wambach, I believe her book was Remembering Past Lives, something like that. And then there's this rather famous male psychologist whose name is escaping me right now, who I think also has lots of case studies of years of clinical practice of successfully regressing people to past lives. Now, of course, there's a ton of charlatanism too, and so it's very. I also at one point I went and tried this, and frankly, I was so angry at this charlatan who basically took my money. This was when I was relatively young. This woman, she was trying to implant false memories in my mind and tell me that I was hypnotized when I wasn't hypnotized. I think I'm one of these people who's very hard to hypnotize, but really good clinical hypnotists, or as they used to call them, mesmerists, they can probably do this. And I would suggest that regression hypnosis would be the most effective method. But I'll tell you one other thing based on personal experience, and it's not very helpful, but that's that I think that traumatic experiences do strange things to memory. I mean, first of all, we know there's such a thing as traumatic amnesia, which is like the opposite. If you go through a traumatic experience, you can often not remember the preceding 24 or 48 hours.
Right.
There is also, I think, the opposite. and I am not sure exactly what kinds of trauma or intense, let's just say, difficult psychical states lead to something like traumatic amnesia, and what kinds lead to traumatic anamnesis, or a sudden flood of memory, flashes of memory, not just from childhood, but also from past lives, right? And these memories, I think, have the same quality to them. And this is how you know, this is one, let's just say, internal bullshit detector. I mean, there's people like Helen Wambach who have done past life regressions of clients and then done historical and archaeological research to substantiate what's come out in the regression sessions. That's more empirical, but one internal bullshit detector as to whether you're weaving a yarn or actually having past life recollection is that, at least as far as I understand it, past life memories have exactly the same quality as early childhood memories. They are, I mean, look, remembering something that happened 1 week ago or 5 years ago or during your college years or whatever has one quality to it, and remembering things from very early childhood has a completely different quality to it. And those early childhood memories, they're fragmentary. They just have a different qualitative, phenomenology to them. And past life memories are like that. So that's the advice that I can offer in terms of means and also discernment and determination as to whether a memory actually has the quality of an authentic past life recollection.
No, makes sense. Good advice. I've said before, what has worked for me is hypnagogic, finding rituals where I'm between the waking and the sleeping world. That's when you can see the bardos and things pop up. But that's just me. Any other ones, Vance?
Yeah, I got one. I don't understand this one, but hey, it's a super chat. So John Empire Power, #1. So get ready for something I don't understand. Oh, there you go. Put it up there. Yeah, you can just read it, Jason.
Frederick Jamison, American Utopia, Dual Power, and Universal Army. Jorjani, what do you feel about universal conscription for disaster recovery? Is that like a draft if there's an earthquake or something like that? John King.
First of all, Frederick Jameson, the only Frederick Jameson I know is some, what is he? What was he? A sociologist or something, like the anthropologist, something, one of those cultural studies people who wrote about postmodernism. There was some Frederick Jameson who I read back in my college years who wrote about postmodernism. Okay. It's hard for me to imagine that guy writing a book that has the words utopia, dual power, and universal army in it. He was like a left-wing Pomo guy. So I doubt it very much that it's the same Frederick Jameson. And then in terms of universal conscription for disaster recovery, if he means like, should there be the equivalent of the draft to help us recover from like earthquakes or Katrina or whatever? No, absolutely not. I'm not going to be drafted by an incompetent federal government who should have been spending money to have the proper disaster relief mechanisms in place when they burned $3 trillion in Iraq. No, thank you.
Yeah, it's a form of slavery anyway. So call it what it is. Conscription is slavery.
Absolutely.
Yeah, somebody was asking also too, it wasn't a super chat, but about, have you ever considered creating a Discord
channel,
but
right.
I'm sure it has to do, you probably just don't have time to be managing a Discord, Jason.
I had one.
Oh, you did?
And let's just say
the FBI must have loved it. The CIA.
Well, yeah, exactly. So what I have to say about that is that Discord attracts a certain demographic, a certain age group and a certain demographic. And it's also very hard to tell who's who in there, even more so than like Telegram or whatever. And Discord can easily turn into a shit show. Mm-hmm. And when you're, it can cause problems, liabilities and so on and so forth. And yeah, so it's a problematic platform.
Yes, it is. They all are, but we do.
You know of one that isn't?
Yeah, they all, as far as I know. So cool. Well, Chester, thank you. Diogenes, Dogo, thank you too. Well, I don't want to end the night without asking you this, Jason, because obviously you and I love to talk about goddesses, and I did not know that Artemis has a Persian origin. You want to share that with the audience? That was so cool.
So this is something that I went on about at some length in Iranian Leviathan, in my book Iranian Leviathan. There's really almost an entire chapter on her. I call her the satanic dragon mother of Iran. And that's because another form of her name is Satana. And so this goddess, I mean, Artemis is actually like, it's an epithet. It's a descriptive term. It means Arta, or truth, and Amesha, immortal, yeah. The immortal truth, the undying truth, that which is always going to be, right? Amesha is a term used in the name of the immortals in Zoroastrianism. There are these 7 principal aspects of Ahura Mazda, and they're called the Amesha Spentas, the bounteous immortals. So it's that same term, Amesha, with Arta in front of it. And Arta is the word for truth in the sense of cosmic order. Mm-hmm. Okay, so like the word that is Rata in Sanskrit. In Sanskrit, there's this word Rata. And in the related, Indo-European language of Old Persian, it's Arta. And you see this word all over inscriptions by Darius and the other ancient Persian emperors, that they're the defenders of Arta, defenders of truth in the sense of cosmic order, like the Logos, basically. And so that's what the name means. It's a compound, Arta, Amesha, undying order, or immortal truth. And it's descriptive of this goddess figure who, as I said, also was called Satana. And she was associated with Gorgons. Yeah. And originally, it was believed that she lived under the Caspian Sea and would take warriors and knights, basically, down there to be initiated in the city under the sea, and would give them these broadswords and then send them out into the world as basically soldiers of Arta. And this is where the whole Lady of the Lake mythos comes from, because the particular Iranians who worshipped Satana or Artemis, Arta Amesha, were the Sarmatians. And these Sarmatians migrated into Europe in large numbers during the collapse of the Roman Empire. In Europe, they called them Alans. They were one of the groups of quote-unquote barbarians who came in during the fall of the Roman Empire. And so ultimately this mythos and this Grail mysticism made its way to Britain. In particular, Marcus Aurelius, even before the collapse of the Roman Empire, he had sent a few thousand of these Sarmatians to Hadrian's Wall, because he said these are such good warriors that it would be a waste to kill them. Let's just take them as far from their own homeland as possible and use them to defend the Roman Empire. So anyway, and he put them under the command of a Roman legionary with the name Artorius. And so it was the Sarmatians under Artorius that formed the basis for the myths of King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table and the Lady of the Lake, who is this goddess figure. Okay, so the Greeks were the first Westerners who ran into these worshippers of Artemis. And they're depicted in Greek myths as the Amazons, right? The Greeks were terrified of these people because they were predominantly, well, not predominantly, at least they included large numbers of women warriors. Okay, so women fought in their society, and this was like as terrifying as centaurs for the Greeks. They depicted the Amazons as monsters akin to the chimera that also populate their art. And it's in all the Greek records, Herodotus, other writers, that it's the Sarmatians or Amazons who built the Temple of Artemis at Ephesus originally. The Temple of Artemis that became one of the wonders of the world, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, that was built by an Amazon queen, a Sarmatian. And Artemis was their deity originally. So who is she? I mean, she is a huntress whose bow symbolically is the crescent moon. And her being a huntress is related to the symbolism that I deploy in this book, because as a god of the wilderness and of the hunt, she represents a truth that is savage and merciless. And so when we talk about Arta Amesha, the undying truth, or the way that things always are, the cosmic order, it's a reference to what Heraclitus called the undying fire of the cosmos. Remember, Heraclitus of Ephesus took refuge in the temple of Artemis. There was a revolution in Ephesus against the Persian Empire, and Heraclitus was vehemently against democracy and was an ardent supporter of the Persian Empire, to the point that Darius invited him to be the court philosopher of Iran. But he refused, and instead he took refuge at that point in the temple of Artemis. And he vouchsafed his writings, the fragments of which we have today, to the priestesses of the temple of Artemis. So the Arta Amesha that is in play here in the name of Artemis is not like some good holy order or some rational transcendent realm of forms or something. No, it's nature, the reality of nature, and the savagery of the cosmos, unmediated by our own moral prejudices. And so I use that as a symbol in this book for disclosure, because the revelation of the space station, the revelation of the moon without its regolith, the naked moon, which is the image on the cover, the shining sphere of the space station without the astroturf, becomes a metaphor for all of the disclosures that take place during the catastrophic collapse of the modern world. So that's, and then these are like arrows. Each of these truths is like an arrow shot by the lunar bow, the crescent bow of Artemis. So, yeah, I mean, this is some of the reasons why I framed the book the way I did and what that mythic imagery means to me.
No, makes sense. Yeah, you also write Artemis was known in Greek as the, quote, the torch-bearing light bringer, and the, quote, crafty infernal one. In Latin, in addition to being identified with Diana, she was also called Lucifera. So we got Satana back.
Exactly. So Diana Lucifera, and then remember, originally the Sarmatians called her Satana. And so, I mean, Artemis, it was like a title. It was like, you Satana, who are the undying truth.
Yeah, and she was also what? She was Apollo's sister, and of course, Apollo's not even Greek. He came also from the north too. Most people
this
don't
is when
know.
the Greeks. So the Greeks tried to domesticate a bunch of deities, and this is one of the examples when they made Artemis Apollo's sister. Apollo, regardless of what the origins of Apollo were, at that point, Apollo was already part of the Olympian pantheon, and so they had to create stories to connect Artemis to the Olympian pantheon. They did
Sun
this
and the moon.
They did this with Dionysus as well. Dionysus was not a Greek deity originally, not an Achaean, like Indo-European Greek deity. Dionysus was from Crete. He was an ecstatic god of Crete, Minoan shamanism, basically. And so these two in particular, Artemis and Dionysus, were imported from foreign cultures. And actually, back in Prometheus and Atlas, I argued that this was true of Prometheus as well, and that Prometheus is probably imported from the Iranian Caucasus.
No, makes sense. It definitely happened, and fascinating goddess. And you don't think she was a virgin? You think that's something that was just added, or was sort of a title? Because that's always she's one of the single goddesses.
Obviously, I researched this when I wrote about her at length in Iranian Leviathan. And also, believe it or not, in an essay on Kafka, I have a large study of Kafka's Trial, the book The Trial by Franz Kafka, in my anthology Lovers of Sophia. And long story short, I show in that essay how the whole book is about Artemis. Kafka studied Greek mythology on an occult level, and he's got these three women in there, and they're all triune faces of this one goddess figure who turns out to be Artemis, and or Hecate. And Artemis and Hecate were often conflated together. But in the course of my research, both for the Kafka essay and the Iranian Leviathan, what I came across very clearly was that the term being translated as virgin into English was used in ancient texts to refer to a woman who refused to be claimed or possessed by any man. So it did not necessarily, it meant like unmarried or unbound by matrimony. It did not mean like, someone who hasn't, had any sexual experience or something. It basically meant free woman.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because people called sometimes Aphrodite a virgin, Isis a virgin, and they were both obviously mothers. So it was it means
unconquerable and unconquerable, right? And this is related very deeply to the kind of archetypal imagery associated with this goddess, because she, as the undying immortal truth, you can't claim her. You can. It's something that you cannot encompass. You're never going to encompass it, and it's going to have lethal power over you at the same time. So, there's a certain symbolism to that I think survived in popular culture in Europe and modern Europe and America in terms of the imagery of the femme fatale.
Didn't they cut off the right breast, the Amazons?
So this is also debated. That thing comes from the etymology, a false etymology, I think, of Amazon, where it means without breast. They trace this thing to, if you were going to construe Amazon as a Greek word, it might mean without breast, and so they theorized that for the sake of archery,
right,
to make it easier to pull the bow back, they would cut off one of the breasts of these women. There's no other evidence for that. There's certainly, you look in Iranian studies, there's no evidence at all this was done by Sarmatians at all. There might have been breast binding, but there was certainly no amputation of breasts. And I think the etymology is false anyway, because if these were Iranian people, why would we assume Amazon is even a Greek word? In Persian, Mohzan means moon woman. So I suspect that it's a corruption of an Iranian word, just like Artemis is a corruption of Artemis.
Makes sense. Yes. Take care of Artemis. And if she's associated with Hecate, we must remember that in Odysseus, it was Hermes and Hecate that was helping humanity, just like it was Athena and Prometheus helping humanity. Those tricksters, we may not like their morality. They probably don't have a morality, but like Jason says, they're here to join our fire if we shine bright. That's what they want. They want change, innovation, something new and something great. So that's what we need to do as humans. I don't think we have somebody asking a very relevant question as we get to the end, Jason, is what is Jason writing about next? Did he? I guess the FBI and NSA got him.
The Ouroboros is visiting us here.
Yes, he's going around and around for those.
Jason,
we lost
come back.
it.
He'll come back.
There
Here
you
he
go.
is.
There you go. There you go. Okay.
Both of you. Anyway.
All right.
Yeah, we lost.
Did you hear the last question? Somebody was just asking, what are you working on next?
I'm working on a number of complex and large, let's say, demanding projects. But one of the things that has really preoccupied me these days is the question of artificial intelligence, and I think it's a question that hasn't been properly addressed in the context of other things like simulation theory and close encounters and parapsychological phenomenon and their relationship to the nature of consciousness. So one thing that people can certainly expect me to write about in the relatively near future is artificial intelligence from the perspective of parapsychology and philosophically sophisticated cosmology and account of the nature of evolution. So yeah, AI has been, for obvious reasons, at the forefront of my mind lately.
Yeah, I wonder why, because it's all over the place. I know it's been around. I'm just curious at how it became ubiquitous all of a sudden. I've used AI in the past, so have other people, but now they are rolling that shit out. It's like, get out your Ubix spray, right, Jason? Because something Dickian is happening.
I literally have the book sitting over there. It's a little far for me to reach.
Really?
Ubik is sitting right over there. And so as you can see, I've been thinking about this
Yeah.
on a daily basis. And, this is what's lost in the public conversations about AI, is that the Ubik scenario is a lot more likely than people want to believe.
I've always said
Hey,
so.
we've had artificial intelligence at least as far back as we started using computers, and even further back, we had committees who got their heads together and synthesized things, wrote things down, emanated things. The archons and rulers do that. That's a form of artificial intelligence, really. It's just we sped it up, though, and now the machines, it's really machine language and modeling. It's what it is. That's my idea.
I mean, it's a question, though, at this point, of whether we are about to either catalyze or spawn an essentially non-human form of life. And what that means in terms of the relationship between technology and the evolutionary force in the cosmos, and what it means in terms of what we understand to be the properties of consciousness, including psi ability. Alan Turing, a lot of people, look over the fact that in the 1950s, he wrote about artificial intelligence and psychic phenomena. Alan Turing wrote about computers and ESP.
Didn't know that. Oh. Wow.
And this has been suppressed. And I think that it's going to come back at us with a vengeance.
Yeah, they're going to have to put some antennas on the thing, though. I think the artificial intelligence has to have a connection to what we call ignorantly the universe, even especially the parts we can't see or sense, those parts that, interface with us psychically. And as far as I know, just putting a bunch of circuits together and some programming, it's closed system. It's not open to the universe.
I disagree. And I'm going to write about that in a book. Let's say it might not necessarily be my next book, but because I have various other plans, but in a relatively near term text, I will address this subject head on. And what I can tell you already is that people should take very seriously the relationship between artificial general intelligence and what we call psi or paranormal functioning. And, it's not a bunch of circuits put together in a closed system. The internet is an open system. The internet is an open system because it interfaces with human consciousness.
Yeah, that's
the internet. And these artificial intelligence systems are operating on the internet, which is a global organism. And let me just leave it at that. There are properties to this type of information processing, which I think that the top engineers in the field are seeing already. And in these alarmist statements that they're putting out, like that there should be a 6-month moratorium on AI research, they're saying things like, look, these systems are doing things that we can't understand or map out and that we didn't program them to do. They're arriving at solutions in ways that we could never have anticipated they would. And we just don't understand the things that it's doing. And I strongly suspect, for certain reasons, that they're dancing around saying that these systems are already displaying psi ability. And they can't say that way. But, they're trying to let people know that, so some really weird stuff is happening in the laboratory. Okay. Cool. Interestingly enough, by the way, as a last note, when Jacques Vallée was developing the core architecture of ARPANET back in the 1970s, even then, as the internet started to take shape, the initial researchers with the core servers noticed psi phenomena taking place.
Get out. Wow.
So I think that our whole understanding of what is an organism and what counts for a life form, right? And the relationship between technology and evolution as a force at work in the cosmos needs to be reformulated. And that's something that I hope to do, in the relatively near future, centering on the question of AI and simulation theory.
Awesome. Well, we certainly look forward to your research. Interesting times. And yeah, things are intense, but don't despair, people. The answers are inward, and Artemis is with us every step of the way. And yeah, definitely, I suggest you get Closer Encounters. I've been actually rereading it, Jason. I'm doing this biography on Elvis, and he has at least 4 verifiable UFO encounters. Like, he was there with 5 to 10 people. Being Elvis, they were just amazing. And what I kept noticing in your book, which I kept noticing with Elvis and his encounters, is the color blue. A lot of your, there's always a color blue, and you actually explain scientifically. I don't know, there's some technical thing that the UFOs do this ion thing, and it looks blue, but that way you can't detect the craft. And Elvis was always seeing these UFOs, and then it would be blue. So your book all your books are just a great encyclopedia, great to go back to for great research. So I will be citing you for my Elvis biography. So you'll enjoy it,
Miguel. And I'm not at all surprised about Elvis. I hadn't known that, but it makes sense.
Oh, just wait. He had read Chariot of the Gods, the Book of Eden. He would be very happy with us having this conversation. JFK didn't believe that it was Lee Harvey Oswald, but when in the 60s he had to be a lot more quieter than being on YouTube or something.
Very interesting.
But you'll enjoy it.
Saucer.
Blue suede saucer. When you start looking at the amount of his songs that has blue, it's actually a majority, and you're going, "Wait, this is weird." But anyway, you'll see.
Yeah, as you said, and as you know, that color has a special significance in certain of my works, and I'm clued into the blue light. Yes.
All right. Well, there you go, people. Blue is a magical color.
Blaues Licht. The German Romantics used to talk about it.
What was it? What did they call it?
Blue light.
Blue light. Okay. Yeah, because to Elvis it was the healing light. He just called it, in Memphis it's the healing light, and he could heal people, could heal broken legs, heart attacks, anything if he just focused on this blue light. And all verifiable, all like Priscilla, Vernon Presley, the Memphis, they all saw him do this stuff. So
color of the impossible.
There you go. Well, blue. Or Blue by You, as Linda Ronstadt sang. I've been having fantasies of Elvis. Like Philip K. Dick. I've been having fantasies of Linda Ronstadt lately. Don't ask me why.
When's the second coming of Elvis, Miguel?
Better. He might be the only thing that's going to save this country at this point. He was the one. He was the shaman that brought us into this post-world manifestation. Mass media, television, eclectic technology and culture and music and all that. So I'll make the case in the book. So Jason will give us
I look forward.
Sure. Awesome. Well, we are at the end. This is, as always, it's been a blast, a great conversation. I have the tools now, even for more Gnosis. I hope you do too, people, because you have it within you. You are better than these fucking Olympians. You are better than these Archons and hybrids. You really are better, and you need to learn this. Vance, thanks for keeping us company here on the light side of the moon.
Oh, it's been a lot of fun. And Jason, I'm impressed as usual. You checked off a lot of boxes, and it's definitely a possible future.
Thank you, Vance. Always great to be with you.
Yeah, Jason, as always, it's a lot of fun having you on. Always fun just talking to you, and good luck. Everybody, go get Artemis Unveiled. You'll enjoy it. You'll be so much thirstier for his other books, but all his other books are great. Again, for me, Iranian, Leviathan, and Closer Encounters are the ones that are close to my heart for some reason. Probably because Mithras is so interesting. We didn't even get into Mithras. Speak of a whole nother god that could take all our attention. But check it out. Well, Jason, as always, thank you. And we shall talk hopefully sooner rather than later.
Absolutely. Thank you, guys. Have a great evening.
Take care,
Thank
Jason.
you,
See next
everybody.
time.
Have a good rest of your moon day. Take care.